"Order in the court!" The judge's gavel cracked like a gunshot, and the sound still rattles in my head. I watched Marjorie Whitcomb, the self-crowned queen of cul-de-sacs, stand there with her pearls gleaming and that satisfied Cheshire cat grin. Beside her, my grandfather's hands shook as he clutched his cane, the weight of 80 years of farm work bending his frame. The court clerk read the verdict like it was just another Tuesday, like they weren't stripping away $500,000 from a man whose only crime was growing tomatoes on the wrong side of a property line. You could have heard a pin drop. Then Marjorie adjusted her glasses, leaned toward her lawyer, and whispered something that made him laugh. That laugh was the sound of my family's land being stolen, acre by acre, paper by paper. That laugh was the beginning of my education in just how cruel and just how absurd an HOA can be when it smells blood in the water. Now, let me rewind. It started with letters. Not one or two, dozens. Cream-colored envelopes with the HOA's embossed logo, slipped under the farmhouse door like cockroaches. The first one claimed community dues were past due. My grandfather, confused, squinted at the paper and muttered, "What community? Cows don't have a swimming pool." The farm had been in our family for 3 generations, carved out long before Marjorie's subdivision sprouted its neat rows of vinyl-sided houses. But the letters kept coming, and they grew angrier. Notice of lien. Final warning. They cited bylaws thicker than a Bible, sections numbered and cross-referenced until your head spun. The kicker, the bylaws weren't even drafted when Grandpa first bought the land. Yet, here they were, demanding $200 a month in dues for amenities we never used. The clubhouse sauna, the tennis courts, the annual wine walk Marjorie hosted where she strutted in designer heels while everyone else brought boxed Chardonnay. I went with Grandpa to one of their meetings, just to see. The HOA board sat in folding chairs under the fluorescent glare of the clubhouse, sipping from branded water bottles like they were senators at a hearing. Marjorie presided in the middle, tapping a gavel she bought off Etsy. "This matter is simple," she announced, her voice syrupy but sharp. "The Whitcomb Meadows HOA maintains that all properties within the extended boundary are subject to dues, and Mr. Clarkson's farm falls well within our extended map." Grandpa cleared his throat. "Ma'am, with respect, my property isn't in your neighborhood. My house was here before your cul-de-sac even had plumbing." A man in a golf shirt leaned forward. "Extended boundary means extended responsibility." "And extended profit," Marjorie muttered, not quietly enough. The room tittered with polite suburban laughter. I swear I saw her eyes flash when she looked at me, like she already knew how this story would end. What followed was a year of battles, fines stacking like bricks, threats of liens, lawyers who charged more per hour than our farm made in a week. We tried fighting. Grandpa even found an old map, stamped and signed, showing his land was separate. But Marjorie's team argued that the county had updated zoning in ways that blurred jurisdiction. I watched as neighbors, people we'd sold sweet corn to every summer, nodded along with the HOA like sheep. By the time we reached court, Grandpa was tired. His once deep voice rasped when he testified. "I never signed no HOA," he said, holding up his calloused hands. "These are the only contracts I ever honored, work and soil." But words don't stand up against money, not in a room where lawyers wear watches worth more than tractors. When the verdict came, $450,000 in back dues and fines, it wasn't just a number. It was the sound of the farm breaking under his boots. I could see it in his eyes. The shame, the disbelief that neighbors he'd fed and helped through winters could betray him so neatly, so legally. After the ruling, Marjorie strolled past us in the hallway, perfume cloud trailing like gasoline. She stopped, tilted her head, and said, "You should be proud. Whitcomb Meadows is a prestigious community. It'll be an honor to have your land under our care." I wanted to scream. Grandpa just looked at the floor. That night, the farmhouse kitchen felt colder than usual. The clock ticked louder, the walls seemed to lean in. Grandpa sat at the table, the judgment papers spread out like a funeral program. He didn't say much, just kept tracing the HOA seal with his fingertip. Finally, he whispered, "They stole it. They stole everything." And he was right. Only later would I learn why they wanted it so badly. Because behind the HOA's fines and fake jurisdiction, there was a bigger plan. A plan that would turn our fields into something I couldn't have imagined. Something bright, loud, and profitable enough to make Marjorie Whitcomb the queen of more than just a cul-de-sac. But in that moment, all I knew was this. The war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. "To Whitcomb Springs!" Marjorie Whitcomb raised her martini glass high above the glowing pool, her pearls catching the reflection of neon blue water. Around her, HOA board members clinked glasses, their laughter spilling into the night like champagne. What used to be cornfields and rows of soybeans now pulsed with resort music and the smell of chlorine. My grandfather's land had been reborn, not as a farm, but as a playground for the very people who had stolen it. It was obscene. The Whitcomb Springs Resort opened less than 2 years after the court ruling, a monument to pettiness disguised as luxury. Locals weren't even allowed to set foot inside without a hefty guest access fee. The brochures called it exclusive. I called it a gated cash grab. Pools glistened under LED lights, tennis courts stretched where our tractors once rattled, and Marjorie walked the grounds like she was Caesar inspecting Rome. The grand opening was front-page news. "Small town gets big city luxury," the headline read, as if this was progress. Nobody mentioned the family that lost their farm to fund it. Nobody mentioned the lawsuit that had gutted an old man's life. They just printed glossy photos of the Whitcombs in matching suits, grinning as if they'd built the place with their bare hands instead of with stolen land and HOA dues. I drove past the resort once just to see it. A line of palm trees, fake, imported, and planted at absurd angles, guarded the driveway. The entrance gate was staffed by 2 security guards in polos, checking names against a laminated list. The air smelled of chlorine and grilled steak. I sat in my beat-up truck watching SUVs roll past me, each one with tinted windows and golf clubs rattling in the back. I don't know what burned hotter in me, the anger or the shame that no one else seemed to care. Inside the neighborhood, things shifted too. The HOA began using the resort as their headquarters. Monthly meetings weren't in the stuffy clubhouse anymore. They were in a glass-walled boardroom overlooking the pool. Members arrived in resort robes, sipping mojitos while Marjorie banged her gavel. The minutes of those meetings read like a comedy of arrogance. New bylaw proposal. Marjorie announced one evening, flipping her hair as if she were chairing Congress. Residents may not dry laundry outdoors. Whitcomb Springs prides itself on aesthetic consistency. A man objected, "But my wife hangs sheets out back." "Then your wife is in violation," Marjorie snapped, gavel slamming down. Motion passed. They silenced dissent with lawsuits, just as they had silenced my grandfather. A neighbor who complained about resort traffic found herself fined for lawn nonconformity. Another who spoke at a town hall against the resort suddenly received letters about unauthorized alterations to her mailbox. It was petty tyranny, wrapped in legalese. But here's the thing about tyrants. They get sloppy. I started hearing whispers. At first, just murmurs at the diner, in hushed tones over coffee cups. "You hear about the Whitcombs' land deal?" someone said, sliding me a look. Then at the hardware store, a man leaned close and muttered, "Paperwork's fishy. Folks saying they never had the right to build out there." The rumors multiplied. Something about zoning permits filed under the wrong name. Something about a deed transfer that didn't add up. Most people shrugged. Who wants to fight the queen of cul-de-sacs when she's got an army of lawyers? But I listened. I kept listening. One night, I snuck close to the resort fence, hidden by shadows. The bass from a poolside DJ shook the ground. Through the chain link, I saw Marjorie laughing with a group of board members, waving a stack of papers like she'd just signed peace accords. Her voice carried, smug and clear. "They'll never figure it out," she said. "By the time anyone notices, Whitcomb Springs will be untouchable." The laughter that followed was worse than the court verdict. It meant they knew. They knew something about the land wasn't right, and they didn't care. Back in my truck, I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. For the first time since that gavel slammed, I felt the tide shift. Maybe not yet, maybe not tomorrow, but cracks were forming in Marjorie's empire. And as much as I wanted to storm in, tear down her neon empire brick by brick, I knew I needed proof. Cold, undeniable proof. So I made a choice that night. I was going to dig. Into county records, into deeds, into every scrap of paper Marjorie thought she'd buried. She could build fountains and tennis courts on my grandfather's soil, but she couldn't bury the truth forever. The question was, how deep had she buried it? The lockbox clicked, and inside lay the deed, yellowed, brittle, and bulletproof. My grandfather's handwriting scrawled across the margins, right next to the county seal. It spelled out in plain English what no HOA lawyer could spin. Our land was exempt from any future covenants, dues, or community obligations. In other words, Marjorie Whitcomb had built her empire on sand. I can still feel the chill of that funeral parlor. The scent of lilies and floor polish clung to my clothes as I slipped the lockbox shut, heart pounding in my chest. Everyone else was murmuring condolences, spooning potato salad onto paper plates in the fellowship hall. But me? I was staring at the key to destroying Whitcomb Springs. The woman who thought she was untouchable had finally slipped. You have to understand. Marjorie's entire strategy was built on intimidation, letters with embossed seals, threats written in paragraphs of legalese, meetings where she quoted bylaws like scripture. But here was the catch. She never thought anyone would turn her own tactics against her. And that was about to become her undoing. The first thing I did was copy everything. Scanned pages, notarized signatures, even the county clerk's stamps. I wanted layers of proof, backups to my backups. Then I started small. Petty, even. I knew Marjorie loved flaunting her authority, so I began by showing up at HOA meetings with copies of their own rules. At one meeting, I raised my hand. "Excuse me, Section 3-4 of the bylaws says residents must file conflict of interest disclosures if they profit from HOA contracts. Did the board disclose that Whitcomb Construction built the resort?" The room went silent. Marjorie's smile froze, her gavel hovering midair. "That's irrelevant," she said, but her voice cracked like a window in a storm. The neighbors perked up. For once, their queen wasn't untouchable. I kept going. Every bylaw she weaponized, I twisted back. When she fined a neighbor for a fence that was an inch too high, I pointed out her resort signage violated town code by 6 feet. When she bragged about exclusive amenities, I asked aloud why the HOA's budget showed mysterious consulting fees paid directly to her cousin. I didn't need to win every point, I just needed cracks to spread. And they did. Behind the scenes, I was working harder. I filed quiet records requests with the county. I poured through zoning maps, old permits, even dusty minutes from council meetings in the 1970s. The deeper I dug, the uglier it got. The resort wasn't just built on shaky land, it was built without the proper transfer ever being approved. The county had never signed off on Marjorie's extended boundary theory. On paper, the farm still stood free of the HOA, a sovereign island surrounded by cul-de-sacs. The day I realized that, I nearly laughed out loud in the records office. All the lawsuits, all the fines, all the money they wrung from my grandfather, it was based on nothing. Paper castles built on a void. The mini-climax came at a town meeting. Marjorie strutted in wearing her resort blazer, announcing plans to expand Whitcomb Springs with a second pool. She didn't see me until I stood up, holding a folder thick with documents. "Funny thing," I said, flipping open the deed. "You don't actually own the land under your first pool." Gasps rippled through the room. I laid copies of the deed and county approvals on the table. People craned their necks, neighbors whispering like kids caught in gossip. Marjorie's face drained of color. That's forged, she sputtered. No, I said, steady as stone. That's your worst nightmare. Signed, sealed, notarized, and filed before you were even born. Her gavel slammed, desperate. This is out of order. But it wasn't. The whispers grew louder. HOA loyalists shifted in their seats. One man muttered, "She knew." Another shook his head, eyes wide. For the first time, the power in that room tilted away from Marjorie. Still, I knew better than to expect instant victory. Marjorie wasn't the type to fold and walk away. She doubled down, calling emergency board meetings, threatening anyone who so much as questioned her. The resort gates stayed shut. Her lawyers sent letters thicker than novels, and suddenly I started noticing SUVs parked outside my house a little too often. But fear cuts both ways. And now she was afraid. I spent nights preparing, building the case piece by piece, the deed, the false zoning claims, the financial conflicts of interest. If she wanted a courtroom spectacle, I was ready to give her one. The last time I saw her before the storm broke, it was at the resort fence. Neon lights glowed behind her like a false halo. She leaned over, perfume choking the night air, and said, "You think you can take me down with paper? I built Whitcomb Springs. I am Whitcomb Springs." I smiled, holding the folder close. "Funny, because paper's exactly what you built it on." She laughed, brittle and sharp, but I saw it in her eyes. Fear. Real fear. That was the moment I knew this wouldn't just end in embarrassment for Marjorie. This was headed for a collapse so loud the entire county would hear it, maybe even handcuffs. And I was ready.